We are indeed honored that Mr. Jim Davis would be with us today. Because he really needs no introduction, and without further comment, I give you a very successful businessman and a cat's best friend, Mr. Jim Davis.
Thank you. President Worthen, Dean Palumba, Dean Arndt, graduates of the class of '86, and parents and guests. I can't tell you what a thrill it is to be before you today, because to be asked back to your university to give an address of this nature is a great honor. I mean, I'm touched to think that the pride I feel for Ball State University is somehow reciprocal. To be quite honest, the real worth of my college experience at Ball State University was not what I retained in my head, but what I retained in my heart. The value, more than the value of the handful of principles I run my business by, was one philosophy that served me well over the years. Now, this is the only point I'm going to make today, so listen carefully. The only legitimate pursuit in life is happiness. The pursuit of happiness pertains directly to your aspirations for the workplace as well. Now, case in point, let's take an insurance salesman who is undercompensated, stressed out, who spends his entire weekend in his garden for relaxation and enjoyment. Now, where is the wisdom in his choice of careers? If working in his garden makes him happy, why isn't he a gardener? I mean, when was the last time you met a gardener who relaxed on the weekends by selling insurance? Now, bear in mind, this is only an example. I don't mean to malign the insurance industry. I know I can sleep better at night knowing my family's protected. But consider this. If your work makes you happy, you'll work harder. The harder you work, the better you'll get. The better you get, the more successful you will be. And the more successful you are, usually this is rewarded financially. And I say usually because I would have considered myself a success as a cartoonist had I only earned grocery money, because I love cartooning. In the workplace, if you pursue happiness, financial gain may well follow. If you pursue financial gain, you will more than likely be disappointed because your heart won't be in the right place. The ideal working environment will mean something different to each of you. Happily, my axiom applies to all of them. You can be happy as a self-employed person. You can be happy working for a small company, and yes, even working for a large corporation, thanks to the more liberal attitudes about entrepreneurs if you happen to be an achiever. Speaking of achievement, a couple of years ago, I was invited to a conference on achievement. It was attended by noted personalities from all walks of life. Dr. Edward Teller, Herschel Walker, Burt Reynolds, Andrew Young, Joe Theismann, Chuck Yeager, Ed Asner, Saul Linowitz, and so on and so on and so on. It was sponsored by the American Academy of Achievement. Now, this was a rather shadowy organization, as closely as I could determine, somewhere to the right of the John Birch Society. But at least I surmised that after meeting Stephen Bechtel and Ross Perot in the reception line. But the essence of it was 50 of us spent 3 days with 400 gifted teenagers. And the purpose of the conference was to determine, if anything, the thread common to achievers. Needless to say, I was intimidated, not by the personalities, but by the young people. The first night I had dinner with a shy 16-year-old girl who hardly said 2 words. I learned later on she was about to graduate from the University of Washington with honors, with a double major in immunology and microbiology. I met a 12-year-old medical student from Muskingum College who'd entered high school at the age of 5, a 13-year-old math teacher at Johns Hopkins University, and a 14-year-old university student who'd earned a perfect 800 on the College Board Achievement Test, which isn't bad considering he was blind. I mean, At any rate, it was comforting to learn the other 49 participants were also intimidated because we were all, with a couple of exceptions, only a little above average intelligence, including even the Nobel Prize winners. But during the course of those 3 days, we learned, in fact, there were some common threads that tied this disparity of individuals together. All of the achievers had the capacity to work long hours. They worked hard at jobs they didn't consider jobs. They likened their work to such things as a series of challenges, games, war, and even life itself. Dr. Marvin Minsky, the father of artificial intelligence, told me he often worked until 2 or 3 in the morning with his assistants, and then he would punch in a computer game and play the rest of the night. Dr. Thomas Startzel, the first person to perform a liver transplant operation, averages about 12 hours a day in surgery, and then works through the night writing medical articles, of which he's published over 500. Dr. David Hubble won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for determining how the brain processes information from the eyes. He said he's broken his experiments down into short experiments and long experiments. His short experiments require a 17-hour day, and the long experiments take 20 hours. He only schedules one long experiment a week because his Harvard staff physically can't handle any more than that. And surprisingly, many of the participants failed to perform at more traditional jobs. Some of them were fired for not being team players. In more than one instance, they returned to buy those companies. Others simply realized they weren't happy with their lives and decided to make a change. Irma Bombeck was a 35-year-old housewife in Ohio. One day she looked in the mirror and said aloud, "There must be more to life than tucking socks." Hence started her writing career. As a group, the participants had a great sense of humor. There was a lot of laughter at the conference. They were also remarkably well informed. Most of them were articulate on any number of subjects. I saw John Forsyth visiting in Chinese with Feng King He, one of the world's richest men. I saw Dr. Robert Jarvik, inventor of the Jarvik 7 artificial heart, sketch out a hull for a sailboat he designed. He was showing it to Hobie Alder, who invented the Hobie cat. Dr. Jarvik had earlier skipped out on a few of the seminars to go sailing. I know, I was with him. He told me how he'd been refused admission to medical school when he was younger. It was only after he'd perfected the first artificial heart that the school, in their wisdom, decided to admit him. The company he formed to manufacture the Jarvik 7 heart was going public later that week. Rob was about to become an instant multimillionaire. There was one more element common to the participants. In spite of the fact they were risk takers, in spite of the fact that they'd forged into unexplored territory, they were supremely confident in their abilities and their visions. Now, it's no easy trick to become confident in your own abilities, at least for some of us. For me, it took hours and hours of applying the tools of my trade until the use of those tools was more or less unconscious. Chuck Jones, the great animator of the Roadrunner and Coyote series, once said that every artist has 100,000 bad drawings in him. And as soon as those 100,000 drawings are out of the way, every one of them are going to be good. It's only after you are comfortable with the tools that you're free to be creative. And creativity to me is the ability to visualize several solutions to a single problem, several ways to take advantage of a single opportunity, and several variations to apply to a standard work habit. These days, creativity in the workplace is being treated with much more respect than it used to. Creativity seminars are now commonplace, and the ability to see things as they can be rather than as they are is becoming a valuable commodity in business today. When I make a business decision, I visualize it in my mind until it seems quite real. And then I move around within the parameters of that decision, asking myself, what if this happens? What if that happens? And if I like it, I sleep on it. Sometimes I'll live with a vision for months before taking action because it's much easier and much cheaper to hire employees and let them go or build an addition and tear it down in my mind than to physically do it. Now, let's talk for a moment about the human element. You're all going to be managed or called upon to manage people soon. And you've all been prepared for this by studying organizational development or administrative practices. In other words, making people do what you want them to do. In fact, AdPrac is the heart of the Harvard MBA program even to this day. But unfortunately, many of the high-powered MBAs I've met have confused administrative practices with manipulation. They underestimate the sophistication of today's business person and would rather deal with employees as numbers and types rather than human beings. And I'm here to tell you there's no better way to motivate than by example. Enthusiasm is infectious. Hard work sets the pace. Honesty builds the credibility. And good spirits provides the moods. You praise in public, you criticize in private. You become the person you would like to work for. Most importantly, if you love what you're doing, something translates through. You can't fake it. If you're happy with your job, your employees sense it. So do your superiors, your customers, your friends, and your family. Garfield may get to go around 9 times in life, but we only get once. Given that, the only legitimate pursuit in life is happiness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.